What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about AA games. There was a pretty interesting segment from Shuhei Yoshida, who was talking to Colin Moriarty on Sacred Symbols Plus, and they talked about Japan Studio. They talked about that closure right after Gravity Rush 2. The theme, even coming from Shuhei himself, was kind of how AA games are dying / dead, right? They're just not available to make anymore. So I want to read specifically what he said, and then we'll kind of go into a little bit of discussion on, if it's true. I mean, look, I guess at the end of the day, this man, this legend knows far, far more than I. It's actually scary then, if everything he's saying with 100% confidence. Not great to hear, that specific thing, but I'll make an argument. I'll make an argument for AA games and maybe how they can kind of rebound here in the future. So, again, this came from Sacred Symbols, comes from Colin Moriarty. During my time, people give me credit, but one of the things I was not successful at was having a successful service game. And the other thing is I was not able to have amazingly successful games made in Japan. Other than Gran Turismo, we had many great products, but we didn't really have many AAA level successful products that became more and more important as the big games became bigger. The indies filled the gap, and the AA market seems to have disappeared. Most of the IPs that Japan Studio had were in that smaller AA size group, and the market became really difficult for these kinds of games. For example, after Gravity Rush 2, they tried to come up with a new concept, but we were not able to greenlight any of the concepts, even though they were really interesting. So now in terms of the discussion part, is he right? Okay, and now, again, he was in a high position of power. He not only worked with the first-party stuff for a good amount of time, right? But then he transitioned actually to literally working with indies. So he saw those two sides. So I imagine, and let's just cut to it. Is he right? He probably is right, on like a large scale. It does make me nervous, right? Because I think this is what's actually, I think, kind of interesting. I look back at the last few years, right? And what are some of my favorite games? Okay, this is a personal thing for me, but I look at Alan Wake 2. Let's look at that, right? Remedy. This is I would argue, a AA studio masquerading, and I say that, in a positive way, actually, not in some sort of huge negative thing. But they're not this gigantic 700-person big, like AAA studio. They do things on a budget. They try to do things, with money in mind, and they do things for less. And, they make an Alan Wake 2. But now what is Alan Wake 2, right? Alan Wake 2 is a AAA game. So it's kind of this AA-ish studio, at least in my opinion, that's trying to make what seems to be a AAA thing. Okay, let's go to another one, right? Actually, you could look at, say, Don't Nod, right? Don't Nod's doing it right now. And I would say, okay, look back at last year, Banisher's Ghost of New Eden, one of my favorite games of 2024. I keep bringing it up. I keep saying it. That game sold horribly, right? Really, really bad. In fact, Alan Wake 2 started slow. Alan Wake 2 just crossed 2 million units a year and a couple months after it came out. Now, it's because it's niche, but aren't all of these games that I've brought up so far, right? Banishers. That is kind of a niche thing, even though actually it really shouldn't be, but that is, again, Don't Nod is not some massive, they've got unlimited spending. No, they are struggling mightily, but they made a game that you can kind of tell is AA, but maybe it's trying, and I don't know, and I'm not saying, okay, it's trying to be AAA, again, as some massive negative. Whether it is or it isn't, it is in that AA kind of space, okay? Honestly, I look at Plague Tale, A Plague Tale Innocence, Plague Tale Requiem. These are also games that they're long, they're meaty, they're extremely beautiful, they got some depth, they're incredible story game. That's another one that I would probably argue is a little bit more AA. How about Astrobot? Now, Astrobot is interesting, right? Because it literally comes from PlayStation. So here's one where it's like, okay, are they trying again, right? Because it didn't work for Japan Studio, but they're trying now. And actually, it's funny enough that, Team Asobi was kind of a spin-off, of that. So, okay, they have not too many people. Right? I think their workforce is under 150 people. They're not the size of Naughty Dog. They're not the size of Santa Monica. And they make a game that's not a 50-hour thing, right? Again, almost a AA studio that's just kind of throwing it out there. So, okay, these are just examples literally off the top of my head, right? I'm sure I could think of more if you give me more time, but I think this kind of makes the point. What I think you have right now is exactly as he said. I think he's right. You have AAA, you have studios that are actually kind of going too big, And then you have indies that are, as he literally says, and I think it's a great way of saying it, filling the void, right? Because now you only have AAA, so you have then everything else. And it really, almost as if AA doesn't exist and indie is AA, right? But yet again, okay, you have the Remedies, and you have the Don't Nods and stuff. You wouldn't really call them indie, right? Like Giant Sparrow is probably more of an indie team, right? It's like 15 people that work there. What Remains of Edith Finch, Unfinished Swan, etc. That is kind of an indie team. You look at like Hades and stuff, right? I guess you could consider that more of an indie team. Yet again, they make a game that actually turns out better than most AAA games. Point being, I do think he's right, but I do think there's still a market. I think the thing is, you just have to make that money work. And I know that's like, it's easier said than done. I feel like there's always going to be an opportunity, okay, for studios that come in and are able to make whatever type of game that they can just at a lower price. And I guess if you're talking about AA, you're probably talking about games that are in that, 10 to 60 million range, right? They're not the biggest things of all time, which is funny enough, right? You go back to like Ghost of Tsushima, and I think the reported budget for that was like 60 million. So you go back 5 years ago, and yes, I mean, not every PlayStation game was like that. The bigger ones, they were actually much higher. But Ghost of Tsushima, 60 million. I mean, I don't know the budget for Plague Tale and all these type of games, but actually that feels like in the kind of range that a game right now that would be considered AA. Yet again, you have things like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and just because of where Warhorse is, right, there's a lot of, I think, reasoning that just less money is given out to these people. They don't make as high of a salary as other people, so literally it's cheaper. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is like a $50 million budget. It would take other games 300 million to match that, but different kind of situation, different part of the world that some of these games are being created in, right? So generally, I think we're still we're not in a great spot in the industry. It does kind of hurt because it's like, all right, if you literally only have AAA and then you kind of have everything else, I think AA is very important. I think how people talk about indies can also be applied to AA, sometimes better, sometimes worse, but I think AA is the same general thing where it's like these are sometimes better experiences than you get with AAA, right? You get more innovation, you get games that are just able to do different stuff, and that's why, by the way, Banishers, thing like Astrobot, Alan Wake, Plague Tale, these are games that not all of them are as creative as the next, but they do push something, okay? They push something out there, and they do it for less money, whereas elements of those are present in AAA games. They're just like 5 times more expensive. The ones that focus more, say, on the story, right? Alan Wake's convoluted story. You have, like, deep stories, say, in The Last of Us, right? Those are deep stories. Those are games that are kind of carried in large part due to the characters and stories. Not the same thing, and not the same price. Much more expensive to do a Last of Us versus an Alan Wake, right? Astrobot, in terms of that creativity, right? Just being able to try different stuff out. Number one, you just don't get that creativity in most AAA games. And number two, if you do, you're paying 3, 4, 5 times the price than Astrobot. So I hope AA isn't gone. Again, he would know more than me, but I feel like there's still some out there, and also how you kind of label them, right? Again, like Remedy and some of these studios, like you could consider them AAA anyway. You would definitely not consider them indie, I think, anymore. But either AAA or AA, kind of pretending to be AAA, like in a good way, however you want to describe it. I do think there's still some out there, that are trying. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.